All right, so before I start talking about John Calvin, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. You should never sell drugs to children. Hey there, students. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about John Calvin and Calvinism. For those of you who are studying the Reformation and just trying to wrap your brain around Calvin and his doctrines, in case you get some questions about that and that sort of thing. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Calvinism. Well, let's start off with the founder, John Calvin. John Calvin was in Geneva, Switzerland. He was French ethnically, but he settled in Switzerland, and he is the father of Reformed Christianity. Now, what I mean by this is not that he started the Reformation, that's more Martin Luther, but there's really this distinguishing characteristic of Calvin that makes a Calvinist truly Reformed, where Martin Luther wanted to just tweak some things about the Catholic Church. There are Catholic doctrines he disagrees with, he gets rid of those, he modifies them, whatever. John Calvin wants to start from scratch, really, a truly Reformed theology, and a theology and a church that really looks nothing like the Catholic Church of his day. So just keep in mind that he is a radical reformer, taking things in an entirely different direction and not just coming up with things that he disagrees with and modifying them. And John Calvin wrote what is perhaps the first work of systematic theology in the Reformation, his Institutes of the Christian Religion. It's very important that you know this book because this is where he writes about all of his doctrines and comes up with this system. Not just these are some things about my theology, but here is an entire theological system, kind of like building a house or something like that. He's going to start from the bottom, I guess kind of the Drake of the Reformation or something like that. And it's really founded upon logic. Okay, now Calvin, there are some things about Calvin's theology that are not very palatable, but you can't really argue with his logic. John Calvin had been a lawyer, so what he really does is he takes scripture and he takes cold hard logic and really puts them together. So you can reject Calvin's framework outright, but it's really hard to find holes in it if you agree with it from the foundation. And the foundation of Calvinist theology is the sovereignty of God, that God has absolute control over everything. And without this, there's no Calvinist theology. And everything that you'll see from Calvinism comes from this, that God, who is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, that he is truly sovereign and he has control. And a big part of this doctrine is the doctrine of predestination, because the thing is, if God is sovereign, then how does it make sense if he wants people to go to heaven and they don't? Joining me here is Stephen Wright, who made a 5 on like all kinds of AP exams. So I figured I'd bring him in for some inspiration, rub his head a little bit for some good luck on your behalf. Now, Stephen could be predestined, all right? When we're thinking about predestination, what this is that certain people are predestined to go to heaven and others are not, even before they are born, that God has picked out an elect, all right? So let's say that God wants Stephen to go to heaven, and God sends me to come and talk to Stephen, and I say, Stephen, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Jesus Christ. Do you have a minute for me to present the gospel to you?
Actually, there's some children over there, and I think I'm going to go sell some drugs to them, so bye.
Wow, what a waste of a 5 on all kinds of AP exams, right? What kind of person sells drugs to children? A very bad person, all right? And what you don't know is that after Stephen rolled off, he goes and he, sells these drugs to these children, but he doesn't realize that people were on to him, and those people are the police, and the police were there. There was a SWAT team. But then Stephen, who just happened to be armed with all kinds of illegal weapons, grenades, all that kind of stuff, shoots back, da-da-da-da-da, boom, 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 all that kind of stuff, and then kills a few of the police, and then he gets in a car and he's driving off and he's going real fast and he runs over an old woman and the Boy Scout who's helping her across the street. And then Stephen runs into a telephone pole and BAM! He's dead, all right? And the last thing that he did was run over an old woman and a Boy Scout after killing police officers, after selling drugs to children. I'm sorry, you are going to hell. Do not pass go, do not collect salvation. Now, the thing is, if God is sovereign, what if God had chosen Stephen to go to heaven? And now God is faced with this, well, wait, I mean, he didn't even want to hear the gospel message. He wanted to sell drugs to kids, and now I've got to send him to hell, even though I wanted him to go to heaven, and now I'm so lonely. What kind of God is that? All right, that's really, that's not a sovereign God, okay? A God who is really at the mercy of what some person decides to do. So this idea of predestination is that God has picked certain people out to join him, and those people do not have free will, because the idea of free will, so championed by the Catholic Church and by humanists in the Renaissance, this idea of free will, to Calvin, it goes against the sovereignty of God, that it makes God powerless and not truly omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, which is why Calvinist theology pretty much does away with free will entirely. This is the most radical of the Reformation theologies that you'll see, and the farthest away from Catholic teaching on free will. Now on to Calvinist theology. Calvinist theology can be easily explained to English speakers with the acronym TULIP. So just think of a flower, and I'm going to go over the 5 points of Calvinism. And these 5 points first start off with total depravity of human beings, that you as a human being are unable to choose God. You are unable to use free will. You are unable to really even freely accept God's grace. There is nothing that you are capable of doing. It's all God. All right, so total depravity of human beings. Then unconditional election, that God did not elect you. You might ask, well, why is it that some people get to go to heaven and some don't? Why are some part of the elect and some not? Well, the thing is here that the election is unconditional. It had nothing to do with you, anything about you, really. It's not, like, people are burning in hell, God's like nothing personal. It's kind of like a teacher who, before the first day of class, looks at the roll and decides, these are going to be my favorite students. This, and this. And I've not even met these people, and these are going to be my favorites no matter what they do. So the election is without condition. You did not do anything to earn it, that only God's mercy resulted in you being elected. Limited atonement, okay? Because while the Catholic Church teaches that theoretically Jesus died for everyone, that God would like for everyone to accept, his lordship and go to heaven and receive his grace, John Calvin believed that the atonement of Jesus Christ was only for the elect, so that they could be saved. The rest of everybody else, sorry. Like I said, nothing personal. Irresistible grace. Resistance is futile. All right, this is something from Star Trek. There were these villains called the Borg. I'm going to nerd out for a second, but they would go around and they would assimilate different races. So they show up and they tell you, they go up there and they say,
lower your shields. Resistance is futile.
And, it's just basically you get assimilated.
You will be assimilated.
All right, so I just had my nerd moment, but I'm a teacher, so I can do that. That basically God is kind of like these Borg on Star Trek, that you cannot resist.
You will be assimilated.
The grace is irresistible, that once God taps you on the shoulder, it wouldn't matter if there are 1 million kids out there that you would like to sell drugs to, you are not going to do that. You are not going to be a drug pusher or a cop killer or somebody who runs over old ladies and Boy Scouts, because God has elected you and you are going to be better than that. Not because you are better than that, but because God has chosen you as one of his elect, and now you are going to act like it. Because you're a great person? No, because God is a great God. And so you can't resist it. And the other thing is the perseverance of the saints, which because God elected you without condition, there was nothing that you did, because the atonement was for the elect, and because the grace is irresistible, there's nothing you can do to lose it. That God elected you, and God's not going to decide that, hey, I'm not so into you anymore, all right? God's not like some boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that. It's like, hey, I used to feel this, but I don't anymore. It's not God, okay? God keeps his promises, makes his decisions, and, you didn't do anything for it. You can't do anything to lose it. So that's basically it. Just think about the elect and getting rid of free will and letting God take care of the whole thing. I mean, this is a real full-service God here. And that's really the premise. There is nothing you can do, okay? So if you're thinking in terms of like, hey, I'd like to go to heaven, what can I do? Sorry, there's nothing you can do. God's either done it or he hasn't. Let's talk about Calvinists a little bit as far as what a Calvinist would have looked like and what their churches would have looked like. One of the things about Calvinism and what makes Calvinists truly radical is their iconoclasm. This describes the removal of statues and paintings and art and all of that kind of stuff from churches. You walk into a Catholic church, you may see a statue of the Virgin Mary or a very nice stained glass and pictures of the saints and all of that kind of stuff. No. When Calvinists took over churches during the Reformation, you see here that churches in Lyon, France are being looted, where the icons you see they're being taken. You see a fire going on there in the background, where they are whitewashing the walls. You see here the destruction of religious icons in Zurich, that they're taking them out and burning them. And a Calvinist church would look more like this, very unadorned. God is not about decoration. If you walk into a church where you see nothing on the walls, whitewashed walls, that sort of thing, and just a cross at the front, that is in the spirit of Calvinism and the Reformed tradition. And as far as the way Puritans dressed, they rejected ornamental clothing. If you look here at Rembrandt's anatomy lesson, he's portraying these Dutchmen who are Calvinist, and they're wearing very simple colors. They're not wearing a lot of bright colors, reds, greens, all that kind of stuff. You see them in very simple whites, browns, blacks, and that sort of thing. That they did not believe in ornamentation because fashion is a sign of vanity, and the Christian should not be vain. Which kind of the irony of Calvinism is that even though Calvinism's not based on works, they were some of the strictest people during the time of the Reformation when it came to how they were supposed to act, how they were supposed to dress, and all of that kind of stuff. And Calvinism spread outside of Switzerland, and it's very important for you to know where the Calvinists are and what they're called. When you go to Scotland, the Calvinists are known as Presbyterians, and the Presbyterian Church was founded by John Knox, who was a disciple of John Calvin in Scotland. In England, Calvinists were known as either Puritans or Separatists, depending on whether they wanted to purify the Church of England or separate from it. And then in France, they were known as Huguenots. Might want to check out my video on the French Wars of Religion if you haven't already, which goes into the struggles between the Huguenots and the Catholics in France. So that about wraps us up for Calvinism. Just remember that it is a theology without free will, that God has elected some people, and if you're elected, you're in. If not, well, sorry, nothing personal, and there was nothing you did to earn it, and there is nothing you could do to get rid of it. Plain clothes, plain churches. If you learned something, you like what you heard here, want to learn more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'd love that. Visit my website. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Like, dislike, comment. I would love to hear from you and dialogue with you. I'll be back soon. Until next time.
So, am I a member of the elect?